Okay, hello everyone. I think we can get started. Thank you all for being here. Some more people might trickle in. Welcome. My name is Leo Steinmetz. I'm the Beneficial Electrification Manager at Acterra, a sustainability outreach and education nonprofit based out of Palo Alto, and we work all over the Bay Area. So I'll be presenting tonight on Induction Cooktops for our Green at Home Workshop series. To give you some housekeeping items, we will be recording this and we will send out the recording afterwards. So if you have to drop off in the middle, or if you have friend who couldn't be here or you want them to see it, we will have the recording out to you. We'd like to ask that you keep on mute for most of the presentation. We actually have some flexibility in this workshop. If there are times when people want to ask questions, if you want to ask them verbally, we can make that happen. Or if you want to make a comment or share a story about your experience with induction, that's also okay. But for most of the presentation, we'd ask that you remain on mute. You can have your video on or off. It's totally up to you. For an overview of what's going to be happening in our presentation today, I will be actually the only presenter. Vanessa Shin from Peninsula Clean Energy was going to speak later about Peninsula Clean Energy and their induction programs, but she unfortunately is unable to be here tonight. So I will be talking about Peninsula Clean Energy and presenting their programs for them. But if you came with really specific questions about their programs, I unfortunately won't be able to answer that. But to go over the overview of the presentation, I'll be talking first about how induction cooking works and why we promote it at Acterra, sort of the different reasons that we're excited about using it. We'll have some time for questions about the technology. That's sort of going to be the bulk of the first part of the presentation. And then I'll have information about using induction in the home, how you can get or install an induction cooktop or range, and info about support programs and rebates and contractor info. Now, this is all information that's going to be sort of designed to get you thinking about induction and get you through the door to looking into it. But I won't be recommending really specific products or specific contractors. I'll just sort of be giving you an idea of the kind of stuff to look for. And then I'll also be talking about our organization, Acterra's induction programming. And then we'll have some time for questions about all of that. And finally, I'll describe to you Peninsula Clean Energy. They are a community choice aggregator in San Mateo County and the city of Los Banos, and they sponsor this workshop series. So while the information we're giving is great for anyone anywhere who's curious about induction, and the more specific information is great all over the 9 Bay Area counties and throughout most of California, we do want to focus in on San Mateo County and their service territory. So you'll hear more about them and their induction programs later. Yeah, so with that, I will dive in. And as you're welcome to engage in the chat as I go. I will try to keep an eye on it. I'll try to answer questions as they come up, and we'll also have these break moments to answer questions and anything else specifically that comes up. So I'm going to start with what is an induction cooktop and what the context for it is, and then talk about why we promote them. So to back up just a second, most people are familiar with what we call gas stoves and electric stoves. And maybe you're familiar with induction, maybe you're not, but it's sort of a new third thing outside the most common ones. Most people understand how a gas stove works. There's, fossil gas, methane is coming in through a pipe. It's being burned to create heat. It's worthwhile to dive in just a little bit on how those electric stoves work here. So the way those work is you have electricity passing through a wire that's inside these metal coils. And when electricity passes through any metal, it creates heat and heats up. Now, in a lot of contexts, this heat is very minimal, like a power wire, a wire that's carrying current for most reasons isn't going to heat up very much. It's just going to be a little bit of waste heat. But sometimes that heat is useful and you actually want to create a lot of heat. One example of this is actually an incandescent filament light bulb. Has a little metal filament in there that gets current passing through it and heats up so hot it glows brightly. And that's where the light comes from. And it's also why those incandescent light bulbs are so inefficient, is because they're generating that light through heat. So they're also generating a lot of heat. But so that's what's going on in these electric resistance burners, these coil burners. There's a little wire inside that coil and there's a current going through it, not very much current because the wire is very inefficient and it generates a lot of heat. That heat goes into the coil, and the heat then goes from the coil into the pan. One aspect of these kinds of burners is that the burner itself, the mass of that metal coil, it has to have what's called a high thermal mass or a high thermal capacity, because you don't want it to heat up or cool down much too quickly. There's a lot of power that's going into it. You want that power to then go into the pan that's on top of it and on top of the food. And so if you cranked it up really high and it, immediately went to a scorchingly high temperature, if there wasn't a pan on it, because there was tons of power flowing through it, and that heated up really fast, that would be really dangerous. You could, burn things very easily. You could burn yourself. You could be a fire risk. And it would also make it a lot harder to control the temperature of things as they cook. So in order for this to be safe and controllable, it kind of has to heat up slowly, and it has to maintain heat, slowly. And that's what makes these so annoying to cook on for a lot of people. Electric stoves are actually the most common type of stove in the United States. They're more common than gas stoves. So there are lots of people who cook on them and cook well, but many people don't like to cook on them because it's so difficult to control the temperature and because they're so slow to heat up. You've probably experienced something where you crank it up really high to get the oil hot enough to, start sauteing your onions, and then you realize it's gone a little too high and you want to turn it back down, but it's not responsive enough to keep the onions from burning. So that kind of relationship between how fast it heats and the way it's being produced with electricity is relevant to induction and what makes induction different. So ideally, we only care about heat in the pan itself, right? We don't care that there's another burner that's heating up. We don't care about a gas flame or an electricity. We just want the pan and the food in the pan to get hot. So ideally, we would just want to produce heat in the pan. And that is what induction is able to do. There's a process called electromagnetic induction or induction. You may have learned about it in a high school physics class, where basically if you have current moving in a wire that's generating a changing magnetic field, it can generate current in other metal that's aligned properly with the coil that's creating that magnetic field, even if they're not touching directly. So it's not passing current directly like through a wire. It's using this magnetic field to induce current somewhere else. So for an induction burner, you have a power coil inside the burner itself that's creating a weak, rapidly changing magnetic field that extends sort of just barely above the burner, above the surface itself. And then the pan itself, which is on that, has eddy currents, which are these small currents. They're not really like electricity moving all the way around, in a wire or something like that. They're these sort of microscopic electricity moving around in the pan. And that creates heat through exactly the same process as the electric resistance burner. There's just electricity moving in metal. It's not perfectly efficient, so it creates heat as a byproduct. So what that means is you're able to create the heat in the pan itself. You're not waiting for something else to heat up and then heat the pan. You're just heating the pan. As soon as the pan gets hot enough, you can turn off the burner and heat stops flowing in. There's nothing else going on. It's just the heat that's already there. If you want to put more power into it to reach a target temperature, you can heat it really fast because there aren't the sort of instability risks because you know exactly how much power is going in. So that sort of precision and that efficiency, the fact that there's no waste heat going somewhere else, all of the heat is going into the pan, and the fact that you can really finely control the amount of power that's going into the pan through this process are why induction is so precise and why it's so efficient. We'll get to why we care about those things later, but that's sort of the background for what induction cooking is. So to kind of, the key thing to take away is just the pan is being created, the heat is being created, not the pan is being created. Heat is being created in the pan itself. There's no other heat, and that's what makes it very efficient. Now, in order for this to work, actually stepping back for 1 second, sometimes this sounds a little frightening to people, right? You have this oscillating magnetic field. It's somehow creating heat in this metal. What is it doing to other objects? What is it doing to like the human body that's standing over and next to it? So in terms of the safety of this, there are a bunch of different things to know. One is that the magnetic field really only is strong right on the cooktop itself, on the burner itself. If you, lifted a pan and held it a few inches above the burner and tried to run it, it wouldn't actually work because the magnetic field falls off in strength so rapidly. So it's not, projecting this heat and this ability to induce electricity far out of it. It's really only happening right on top of that contact surface. In terms of how strong the magnetic field is, it's actually about 500 times weaker than just the magnetic field from a normal refrigerator magnet. It's not the strength of the field that matters, it's the way it's changing and the fact that it's in proximity to this pan that it can induce current in. Now, that's a little misleading in terms of safety because it's not like 500 times safer than a refrigerator magnet because it has this changing magnetic field effect. But there is no harmful effect that anyone has found from oscillating magnetic fields at these frequencies and intensities. For people who are working with stronger magnetic fields in sort of research and industrial settings, the limitations on the safety of magnetic field those people can be exposed to is hundreds and thousands of times stronger than the field from a induction like cooktop or stove. So in fact, this also affects metal and electronics, not very much. You can have a phone right next to your cooktop and it won't mess with your phone or a CD or something like that. I wouldn't put the phone directly on the cooktop and turn it on, but I also wouldn't do that with any other kind of stove. And there is one exception to this, which is if you have a pacemaker, you should talk to your doctor before directly using induction. It's perfectly safe for you to be in the same room as someone cooking on an induction stove or even to sort of walk past it. But if you're going to be standing right over it for a long period of time, you want to make sure that your doctor is okay with that. You don't have a pacemaker that's, especially sensitive to that for some reason. But that's the only real health thing to call out. And anecdotally, in Acterra's experience, we've worked with people who had pacemakers who went and got an induction stove, and most of them, their doctor just said, no, there's nothing to worry about. It's not going to affect your pacemaker. Now, in order for induction to work, the pan has to be what's called ferromagnetic. It has to be receptive to this magnetic induction, which is a complicated microscopic property of it, but that can be boiled down to, it has to have iron content and it has to be able to have a magnet stick to it. Sometimes people say it has to be magnetic, which can be a little bit misleading. It doesn't have to already be a magnet. It just has to be the kind of thing a magnet could stick to. So that means that cast iron and carbon steel always work. Cast iron, pans or a flat bottom carbon steel wok are very common types of pans that always have enough iron content and are always magnetic enough to work on induction. Almost always, stainless steel pans and ceramic pots will work. Most ceramic is actually iron coated with ceramic. So if you have a Dutch oven or something like that that's ceramic, it most likely has an iron core and will work on induction. Magnet will stick to it. Similarly, for stainless steel, steel all has iron content, but there are some steel mixes that remove the magnetic property. So you might need to check, but most stainless steel pots and pans do work. It depends with glass pots if they have a non-transparent base. Often there is an iron coaster in that non-transparent base. Similarly, if you have a copper or aluminum pan that has a thick, different colored base, there is often iron in there, even if it wasn't made for induction. It provides sort of heat capacity properties to the pan that are helpful. But you will need to check. It's not it's not particularly definite one way or another for that kind of pan. Then if you have transparent glassware that is Pyrex, or if you have a copper-only pan or an aluminum-only pan, none of that will work on induction. It is not magnetic. It does not have iron content. It simply, you'll put it on the cooktop, the burner, and nothing will happen. So that is a limitation of induction cooking. It's one I'll get back to later. There are also a couple of other limitations. There is no open flame. The heat is produced in the pan itself. So that means for some things that people like to do with, an open flame from a gas stove, something like charring a pepper or heating a tortilla directly on the burner, you can't do that on induction. You have to use some kind of pot or pan anytime you want heat to be generated. There's also no flowing hot air from the flame itself. So if you care about the air around and above the pan being hot, independent of just the pan itself being hot, there isn't as much of that in induction as there would be with a gas flame. And then the last thing that matters quite a bit is the pan has to have contact with the burner, because that magnetic field doesn't project out in the way that hot air from a flame does. So if you have a round bottom wok or a pan with another, not flat surface, not flat contact surface, you can't use a flat induction burner in order to heat with that, because it'll only heat right on that contact point of the bottom of the round bottom wok, and it'll take a while for the sides to heat up, and that's sort of exactly not the point of a round bottom wok. So there are wok-specific induction units where you can get a curved burner that will heat the wok, all the way around, but you need a specific thing for that. You can't just use it on any burner. So with that being the setup of what induction is, why is this something that we advocate for? Why do we care about it? Well, there are three main reasons. There's air quality impacts, the cooking ability, and efficiency and lack of greenhouse gases. I'm going to start with the air quality impacts. These are things that I've actually only learned about in about the past year or so, and are getting more and more known about and more talked about. And this can be a little bit surprising and a little bit frightening. And I don't mean to present it in a way of like, oh, I need to scare you into doing induction like that at all. Just it's something to be aware of and something to be feel comfortable looking into and knowing the facts about. So I'm going to draw mostly from a presentation that I saw in some materials from Physicians for Social Responsibility to talk about these air quality impacts from gas stoves. But there is a lot of really helpful resources about this out there if you decide to look into this more. So if you think about what a gas stove is doing, you are burning methane in your house, right? There's like methane that's coming into a pipe and you're burning it on an open flame, like directly in the middle of your house, which is not something that I didn't really think about this very much, but in the abstract, if someone proposed that to me, I think I would be like, that doesn't sound safe. But we've all gotten totally used to it. And it turns out it actually is unsafe. The burning of the methane and the other chemicals that are in the fossil gas that's coming into your house create several pollutants that have relevant health impacts just from cooking with gas stoves, over a long period of time. These aren't the kind of thing where it's like breathing smoke from a fire and you realize you're coughing, you realize that it's affecting you. It's more, you have this long-term slow impact of being exposed to these pollutants. So the three main pollutants to worry about are nitrous oxides, carbon monoxide, and particulate matter, which is just sort of like small particles that get stuck in your lungs. And these all independently can have different kinds of lasting and damaging effects on the human body. I'm not the most qualified to tell you exactly what the risks are and exactly what the impact levels and the most common things are. I can tell you that the statistic that I've heard that I found really compelling is children who grow up in a home with a gas stove are 50% more likely to have asthma than children who grow up in a home without a gas stove. I find that really striking. Obviously, it's not 100%. It's not like, oh, if you have a gas stove, you're going to get asthma. But asthma is incredibly common and can be very serious and lead to a lot of other health effects. And gas stoves are contributing to that as well. An example of the sort of severity of these pollutants, because this is just telling you what the pollutants are and what they could do. But this is from a 2017 study that looked at using gas stoves in a bunch of homes. So bear with me, I'm going to walk through a kind of complicated graph here. So this is looking at, you have a home, you have an air quality monitor that's testing for nitrous oxide in the home in parts per billion in the air. That's what that left-hand axis is. And so during the red bars, those are when the stove was, or the oven or the stove was turned on. And the red line, the kind of very jagged red line, is tracking the nitrous oxide concentration in the kitchen, like sort of near the stove. In terms of the safe limit for nitrous oxide, the outside air limit for this is 100 parts per billion. So if you were to walk by a factory, for example, you're walking past it on the sidewalk, and you were breathing air that has higher than 100 parts per billion concentration of nitrous oxide in it, that would be illegal, right? That's air pollution, outdoor air pollution that would be in the unsafe, illegal range. So this red line, when the oven is turned on, spikes fairly rapidly to be well over 100. This is a logarithmic scale on the left. So it's getting up to about 300 parts per billion in terms of the nitrous oxide concentration in the kitchen. And then it takes quite a long time after the stove is turned off to go back down to a safe level. But what's really interesting here is the blue line, which is the air quality in the bedroom, in a different room. And that negative air quality from the kitchen is slowly seeping into the other rooms in the house until that blue line is also above 100 parts per billion much later in the day. So this is indicating now, this is in a specific circumstance of a house that doesn't have particularly good ventilation. I'm going to get to it in a second, but there are a lot of ways to mitigate this without just immediately tearing out your stove. But if you're in this circumstance that doesn't have good ventilation, then just using the stove a few times over the course of the day, which is a very normal thing to do, is putting the air quality in all of the rooms in the house above the legal limit for outdoor air quality, air pollution, and is posing a real health hazard. That being said, there are lots of ways to address this. So this is, again, from Physicians for Social Responsibility on the ways that you can reduce your risk of exposure. If you have a window open and a fan going, I think that rapidly reduces the amount of pollutants in the air, about 70%. So if you're imagining, it varies a lot, but that's the number that I've heard quoted. So if you're at that 300 level and you reduce that by 70%, you're back under 100. You're back under the sort of safe limit. So if you're opening a window, you have a fan going. If you're cooking on the back burners, so the pollutants are more likely to go up into a hood, or more likely to disperse before they're getting to your lungs. Those are all things you can do. If you don't already have a smoke detector that's in the kitchen, if it's a little farther away so it doesn't trigger when you heat oil too much or something like that, you may want to get a carbon monoxide detector specifically for the kitchen to let you know if the carbon monoxide levels are getting high. And then you can also do things like using a toaster oven for something instead of using the gas oven if you have that opportunity to. So there's lots of stuff you can do to keep yourself safe before you move to a non-gas appliance. But the most safe thing is not to be burning gas in your home at all. So that's one major reason to be trying to use induction. You could also just be using a coil burner electric stove. That's just as good as induction for these safety reasons, but we think the induction is better to cook on. We just check to make sure that they're specific. Okay. John McKenna says, I've heard that benzene is a health concern too. Yeah, I don't think these are all of the chemicals that could come. And there's also some risk of just like passive methane leakage from the stove itself, which isn't great for you either. Okay, and then I'll get to those other questions in a bit when I get to features from induction cooktops. Okay, so that's one really important reason to try not to be cooking with gas. Why induction specifically? Well, a reason to really like induction is the cooking quality. So this is a graphic that I took from Cooktop, which is a portable induction manufacturer. This is a sort of advertising graphic for their product, but it's illustrating something about induction that I think is very useful. So when you're cooking with a gas or coil electric stove, the thing that you are controlling is the amount of heat that's flowing into the pan and that's flowing like through the pan into the food. So you're not directly controlling temperature, you're controlling the flow of heat. If you are boiling water, for example, you could crank the heat all the way up and have a hard boil where a lot of heat is flowing through it, or you could have it down at a simmer, but those are both very similar temperatures. It's just about how much heat is going in and how fast the heat is flowing through the thing that you're cooking. And that means that you have some level of precision over temperature, but you always have to be adjusting. You always have to be sort of making changes. If you want to heat something to a specific temperature for frying and then hold it there, you're going to do that very differently depending on if you have a huge pan that requires a lot of heat to maintain at that temperature versus if you're just, again, sauteing a few onions in a corner or something like that. With induction, because you have this incredibly precise control over the power that's going into the pan, and because it's mediated electronically, you can actually have it reach a target temperature and hold it very precisely, kind of regardless of what the circumstances are. You can set it, you can imagine, cooking the same dish in two different serving sizes where you would have to do something kind of different on a gas stove. Whereas on induction, you can say, I want you to be at this temperature to cook it, and it will just do that. It will go to that temperature and hold it. If you are concerned about the amount of power that's going into your pan, if you are not in the temperature mode and you're sort of in the other setting, you can set it to some power setting, and that will be perfectly consistent across every time that you use it and perfectly precise because it's electronically mediated and because it's power that's going directly into the pan and isn't going anywhere else. So that means for, really specific types of cooking, for anything where you really care about, oh, I want this amount of browning, or, oh, I want to hold it at this temperature for this long before I heat it, or, oh, I want it to be at a low temperature, but I want to heat it really rapidly to a target temperature, but I don't want to overshoot. Those are all things that are much, much easier to do on an induction stove than they are on a gas stove, or especially on a coil electric stove. So there are a lot of people who really like induction for this kind of precision cooking, and for this ability to be really precise and really replicable with the way that you're cooking. Now, for many people, this doesn't end up mattering. For many people, it's just like, I cook the way I cook, I set it to the right power setting. I maybe remember to myself that it went well or went badly the way I would on any other stove. And for lots of people, it's just going to be kind of the same experience as cooking on a gas stove or any other stove. But for people who are really into this precision and this replicability and really trying to get precise stuff done with cooking, induction provides a level of precision that isn't available in any other cooking type. Let me just quickly look at the chat to see if there's questions here. Okay, a couple of good questions, again, that are about topics that I'm going to get to. There is one here, though, that's sort of about the cooking quality, and we might talk about it later. How durable is the surface of the induction cooktop? Can you take something hot out of the oven and set it on the cooktop to cool, or would it be damaged? So for most induction ranges, you could totally take something out of the oven and set it on the stove, and that would be fine. They have to be rated to have something very hot on top of them and to have rapid temperature changes because they have the pan sitting on top of them as well. Yeah, so they're quite durable, and the ones that I've seen don't scratch easily or damage easily, even from repeatedly putting and lifting up and putting down heavy pans. I'll get to the question about cookware types in a bit, but thank you for that. Yeah, and the auto features. Okay, the last reason that we care about induction is because we want to end gas flow in buildings to avoid burning fossil fuels and to avoid carbon emissions. So this is the real reason that Acterra got into promoting induction, because we're a sustainability organization. Maybe the reason that a lot of you are interested in it because you want to do home electrification projects. So just to talk through emissions from buildings, here's a sort of snapshot of the breakdown of emissions from the building sector in California. And these numbers are millions of metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. They're a measure of greenhouse gases. So this sort of brown cloud on the right is the emissions that are coming from the generation of electricity. So that there's still a lot of emissions coming from electricity generation, but that's going down rapidly every year. It's going down even faster if you have a community choice aggregator or a clean utility in your area that's specifically procuring clean power. That is all power that can be green. We can get that brown cloud to go to zero by procuring clean electricity. But in your home yourself, or in commercial buildings, there's also this blue cloud, which is emissions from burning fossil fuels in the home itself, in maybe a gas water heater or a gas stove. And that cannot be clean. right? That is, by its nature, you're burning gas. It is going to release carbon dioxide no matter what. So we want to replace those things with electricity, with electrical appliances and electrical methods, so that that can also go to zero or near zero emissions. So in terms of the actual emissions from a stove, most people with a gas stove, it's probably only 10 to 30% of your gas usage in your home. You likely also have something like a gas water heater, which is taking up a lot more gas and producing a lot more emissions. So from a just emissions perspective, those are the things to focus on first. Make sure that you're electrifying your water heater, your central heating, things like that. The stove is a lower priority. But you maybe don't care about like what heats your water or what heats your home, as long as your home gets hot. You do care about the experience that you have when you cook. So if we're pushing for all electric homes, for homes that don't have a gas line at all, so that there's no, gas flow, no gas burning, no gas leakage, then the cooking part of that is the most important, right? It's the part that people engage with the most, and it's the part which is the most important to make sure people have access to something they're really going to enjoy. So that is kind of the like crucial thing that induction is important for. It is important for reducing carbon emissions, but it's also really important as like a cornerstone of a full electrification strategy. One side note I want to make here is there's also this little gray cloud, which is refrigerants. Refrigerants aren't something that's being, piped constantly into your house. They're just the fluid or whatever in the compressor of, say, an air conditioner or a refrigerator that allows it to move heat around through the cooling cycle. But those, especially from older units, are such incredibly potent greenhouse gases, millions of times more potent than carbon dioxide or methane or things like that, that even the tiny amount that you have in just your air conditioner and your refrigerator, if it leaks at all, creates a really large global warming impact. So it's not the focus of today's presentation, but if you have an older refrigerator or an older air conditioner, it's super important that when that reaches its end of life and you get rid of it, you don't just like leave it outside or let it go to a landfill, but you get people to come and dispose of it properly and recycle it or dispose of the refrigerant. And basically every county in California has some process for doing this. You can get somebody to come pick it up who's going to dispose of it properly. But it's something that if you care about your emissions impact, everyone should be really careful about if you have an older air conditioner or freezer. Okay, so those are the reasons we care about induction. I have some time for questions about all of that, and let me go back and just go through these questions that came through in the chat. So are there any induction cooktops with auto off features with pots on it after cooking is done? Yes, there are lots of them that have timers or stage settings. This is something I'll get to later, where you can not just use it, turn it on and cook something, but you can use it like a more complicated thing, like maybe an Instant Pot if you use one of those, where you can kind of program a few different things into it to do, and then it'll stop at the right time. So there are lots of these have a feature where you can set a timer automatically, or even do something more complicated where you say, I want you to be at 300 degrees for 15 minutes and then at 450 for 5 minutes and then turn off. Okay, I think Irvin got the recording question in chat. It will probably be available next week. And then for cookware types, are pans specifically made for induction stoves superior? Can you test the strength of the magnetic signal in the pan? The second part of that, I'm not sure. I think most things that work at all, if a magnet sticks to it at all, work pretty well. So I don't know if there's a variation across the kind of strength of the magnetic signal in the pan. In terms of whether to get a pan that just works or that was specifically made for induction, they're almost all the same. If you have, say, an aluminum pan that wasn't made for induction but still works, it probably has an iron coaster in the base that is going to work fine. The only difference might be the size of the coaster, that the induction is only going to create heating in the part of the pan that has that iron coaster in the base. And so it might work with induction, but have like a smaller coaster, and you have no real way of knowing that unless you like cook with it and note that only the middle is heating up first and the sides are taking longer to heat up. So most of the time, pans that work with induction are fine, and there's no reason to replace them with one that is specifically made for induction, but there are sort of edge cases where you might notice that one isn't doing so well and might want to replace it. Is the type of exhaust vent the same? That is a great question. Yeah, if you have a fume hood or any kind of exhaust, it's going to be totally the same. It's less important because there's only the fumes from cooking, from smoke from oil and things like that, and there aren't going to be fumes from the gas burning itself. But you still want to have that ventilation, and it's the same type of exhaust vent. Feel free to keep adding questions in the chat. I'm going to keep going and talk about, okay, how do you actually get one of these? So there's a few different options for trying to use induction. If you have an existing oven, an existing sort of range or a counter area where you want to range, you can get just a range top that will either replace the top of your existing range or go somewhere on the counter. These vary wildly in size and expensiveness and quality. As a sort of rule, many induction appliances are slightly more expensive than an equivalent gas or an equivalent electric resistance one is. That price is coming down over time as the market gets bigger, but it is right now a slightly more expensive thing. So you can see here, there's a 2-panel burner that's a sort of more high-end model that's at $1,600, and then a wider 5-burner model that's only $370. Many of these require 220 volts if they're very large or very high-end units, so you might need to have that high power plug available, which is tricky, and that's even more true if you're getting a full electric range. So these will usually have an oven inside. Sometimes you can just get the top of the range similarly and replace it on an existing oven, but other times you need to replace the whole unit. You want the range to use an electric oven. There actually are some dual fuel units on the market which have a gas oven, but an induction stovetop. We wouldn't recommend that because all of the reasons not to use the gas stovetop are also reasons not to use a gas oven. But it is technically an option. And then there's a new thing that's coming online, coming to availability pretty soon. It's pretty interesting. I don't know a lot about it, but they're making induction stoves that actually have an internal battery. So you can use them with a 120 volt outlet, but have a higher power cooking for some amount of time, maybe for like an hour or something like that. You can use, higher power that would normally require the larger outlet. So if you can't have the space on your electrical panel, or if you want to be, all electric or on your solar or something like that, but you don't have enough power, you could get one of these that has a battery unit in it. Kind of interesting edge case for a solution to some problem. So let me check the chat here. So are there rebates available for induction cooktops from the state or federal? Yes, there are local and federal rebates, and that's something I'm going to talk about in just a couple minutes. Then is there a maintenance requirement? So that varies a lot. By most of them, no, you don't have to get anything changed or looked at to maintain them. The top surface is very easy to clean most of the time. Some of them, especially if they're drawing a lot of power, it may be that they want to come in and look at it and make sure that the plug and the way the power goes into the rest of the body is still working every few years. But maintenance is normally extremely easy. You can just wipe it down with a cloth. You don't need any kind of special cleaner. In terms of where they sell these, it varies a bit. So you can find them at a lot of places where you would normally buy a stove, or through contractors who are buying from some general supplier. The countertop units that I'm about to talk about are available online and can be shipped to you. They are sometimes harder to get. There are some contractors or some stores that won't have them. It really varies a lot by the kind of unit that you're looking for. But most of the time, the same kinds of places that you would look to get, a new gas range or something like that will also sell an induction stovetop. Okay, a follow-up to the question about sensors, about turning off automatically. If a pot with food is cooking and you forget to turn it off after a certain time, would the heat sensors detect the overheat or burns and shut it off automatically? I don't think so. I think almost all of them are going to maintain the temperature that you told it to maintain, kind of indefinitely until you come to turn it off. I don't think they would detect that the food is burning or anything like that. They won't, overheat it beyond that temperature as the food burns away or the water boils off or things like that, but they're still going to, be a fire risk or whatever problems that you'd have from having food on the stove for a really long time. Are the induction cooktops more reliable than gas stoves? So that's a great question. And because they're not super common and because they're, only just now expanding into the market, have been kind of like hobbyist or luxury item for most of the past decade, it's kind of hard to say in general. I think they're like, we haven't heard from enough people who've had an induction cooktop for 20 years to make a claim about it. As far as Acterra has heard, and as far as we know from the market, they're perfectly reliable. They're kind of like any other large electric appliance that's going to be in your kitchen, your microwave or your refrigerator, where most of the time they just work, and sometimes something goes wrong, but it's pretty rare. But it's possible that it's going to turn out that they're less reliable than that in the longer term. The models that have batteries, will they allow you to cook during a power outage? That I do not know. That's a great question. And yeah, I can kind of imagine it going either way, depending on how they work. But that's a great question. Okay. I will keep keeping an eye on this for questions. But so if you can't get a full range top unit, or if you can't get a full range, you can just get a countertop units. And these are quite cheap a lot of the time. You can often get a pretty good one for about $70. You can get a quite nice one for, $120 to $200. So these are basically a hot plate kind of thing that you just set on the counter and plug in. And these work really well. They have a lot more power than you're sort of imagining a like college dormitory hot plate has. And you can use them for all kinds of precise cooking, and kind of anything that you would do on just one burner of your gas stove, you could just do on this, and they work quite well. They also are available as wok units from New Wave. They have a precision induction wok unit for about $200, I think. I've used one of those. It works really well. I like it quite a lot. It has a lot of the programmable and preheating features that I was talking about. But so these are a great option if you want to try this out. If you are thinking about a kitchen remodel in 3 years and have capacity to do that, but don't want to make the change right away. If you are a renter like me and you don't actually have control over what stove you have, these are awesome for that, and they work really, really well for such a small kind of portable, cheap device. So some things to consider as you think about these different options. All of these have internal fans that keep the electronics inside and the top from heating up too much. And for some of them, the fan, it's never like super loud, but for some of them, it's very audible, quieter than a microwave fan, but still, a real noise. There are also other ones that are much quieter, and the fan noise is usually louder for the countertop units. They also have a click noise as they come on and off. It's sort of similar to a click noise that you might hear from your oven coming on and off as it's holding a temperature. Again, that varies how loud it is, but for some people, that kind of occasional click every couple of minutes is a little bit annoying to them. So something to be aware of. You want to be really careful about the size of the burner, because the heat is only produced right above that coil and that burner. And because the temperature can change so rapidly, if you have a small burner and you're using a large pan and you make really fast temperature changes, like over and over again, cooking the same stuff for a year, you can actually eventually damage and warp the pan, because a lot of larger, older pans are not made to be heated so fast from just a small area. So there's kind of like small expansions and small changes in the shape that happen when you heat it. But when it happens to the whole pan at once, it's totally fine. But because the heating is just happening in that area above the coil and there's no like flame licking out or anything like that, and because it's so much faster than an electric coil burner, then you can actually have these strange circumstances where someone is using a small burner on a big pan for a year and then discovers the pan is like warping. So that's a very slow thing. It's kind of unlikely and is only going to happen in this certain circumstance. But that's a reason to be paying attention to the size of the coil in the burner and be trying to get one that's going to be big enough, just at just like an inch or two smaller than the biggest pan you're going to use. Or just be aware if you're using a larger pan, you don't want to heat it up so rapidly. You want to be a little bit more careful with the power that's going into it. And then you might be interested in these advanced functions. I personally am not at the level of cooking where I care about that. I, just want to do my thing like as if it was a dial. But having this timers, these staging, these preheating, this can be really exciting for a lot of people. Let me check the chat. So I don't have any experience. Someone asked about replacing an electric burner cooktop with an induction unit. I don't have experience doing that, or I don't know that I know anyone who has talked to me a lot about the experience doing that. I know in certain circumstances it's possible, but I don't have a lot of ideas about how common it is or what needs to be the case for that to happen. Are induction stoves more common in Europe? I think slightly, but I don't know if for that much longer. But that's a good point that maybe there's some more reliability information there. And then there was a question if you can use cast iron pans on the cooktop. Yes, cast iron is kind of the number one, like that will always work on induction. If someone is trying to get you to get like a new cast iron pan that's induction compatible, that would be ridiculous because it's pure iron. It like works with induction. It's always fine. It's the main thing that I was cooking on for a long time, and it's the main thing that I cook on induction. So there are some challenges with doing this kind of installation. If you have one of these larger units, you need access to a 220 volt outlet. That can be tricky. You may not have that in your kitchen, so you may need to do rewiring. And if you have an electrical panel that doesn't have space for another large current draw, especially if you're doing this in parallel with other electrification upgrades that may require more space on your panel, that might mean that you need a larger electrical panel to move to a larger amperage. Now, there are a lot of ways to keep, quite a lot of draw on a smaller panel by just being careful about, load and maybe getting a 110 volt water heater, maybe making sure that you have if you have an electric vehicle charger, that's not running when there's a lot of draw on the rest of the system. But that requires some sort of careful planning and a more complicated, installation of load management on these different devices. So may mean that you need a panel upgrade anyway. If you want to integrate it with your existing oven, that might be tricky. It just might require more work. If you live in a multifamily property that you don't own, if you're a renter, you may need to get permission from a landlord for some work like this, and that might be tricky or just flat out impossible. And then the last thing to be aware of is if you use one of these countertop units a lot, and especially if you're cooking food on it a lot that produces a lot of smoke or a lot of fumes or anything like that, you're going to want to make sure that you're still ventilating well, even though you likely don't have a fume hood specifically for that unit, so that it's not too far away from a window or you have a fan going or something like that. Great. And there's a suggestion to check out Yale Appliance website for reviews on appliances. Have great reviews based on their repair service data. So thank you for that. All right, now the exciting part, which is rebates and money you can get to do this. So BayREN, which is the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, they'll give you $750 for a range upgrade if you're replacing existing gas. So this won't work if you're getting a countertop unit in parallel to gas. But if you're taking out a gas stove and stopping to use gas, then they'll give you a rebate. And they also have a contractor network of people who know how to do this kind of work and might be able to, help you with purchasing and decision-making and stuff like that. So look at bayren.org. They're a great organization for all kinds of electrification in the San Francisco Bay Area. Silicon Valley Clean Energy, which is a community choice aggregator, also has a contractor network and some help finding contractors. So they're another person to look for. And then this is kind of an edge case, but East Bay Community Energy, if there's a commercial kitchen that wants to switch to induction, they have a much larger and program for supporting that and providing technical assistance for the decision-making and all kinds of things, and they will give you up to $17,500 for that commercial induction change. There's also new money coming down the pipeline from the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the climate bill, Biden's climate bill that passed a few months ago. So that includes a rebate of up to $840 for electric cooking appliances. It's dependent on income, so it's $840 is the limit, but above a certain income, I think it's like 110% of the area median income, it can only pay for half of the appliance. So you would need a like $1,600 appliance to get the full rebate. And above an even higher income, you're not eligible at all after all. But if you're under, I was just looking at the cutoff, but I can't remember it. Something like 140, 150% area median income, you're eligible for some part of this rebate. Also, if there are associated costs for this conversion, the Inflation Reduction Act has up to $500 for that. And if you need to make an electrical panel upgrade because of these electrification changes that you're making, there's up to $4,000 of rebate for that. So this money, none of this is available yet. It is coming to the states, and the states need to figure out how to disperse it. So the state of California will be figuring out what the exact process is for getting this money. None of it is in tax credits that are already available, unfortunately. But if you are looking at something, a few months from now or maybe a year from now, these are all rebates that will be available as well. Yes, the previous rebates we had a question about if they're available in San Francisco, and the answer is yes for the Bay Ram rebate as well. East Bay Community Energy is for Alameda County, so not that one. And these Inflation Reduction Act rebates are for everyone in the United States. Okay, so now just closing up, I want to talk a little bit about Acterra's induction programming. We have an induction cooktop loan program in Alameda County and another one, a smaller one based in Palo Alto. So if you want to borrow one of these things, the countertop units, and test it out, we will give you a kit with a pan and some instructions and a cooktop. So you can try it out. So that's a great program that we're excited about, and lots of people have been able to try induction, see if you like it or not, and if you have any thoughts. East Bay Community Energy, that works with us on the Alameda County loan program, they currently have an induction cooking contest. So if you're in Alameda County and their service area territory, and you already have induction or have some capacity to cook on induction, they have a kind of fun social media thing going on right now. So check that out or submit something to their cooking contests, and you could win a free cooktop. And then we also have twice monthly induction cooking classes where our chef, Kelvin, cooks some delicious plant-based meal on his portable induction burner and talks a bit about, induction-specific techniques. That being said, a lot of the time cooking on induction feels basically the same as cooking on gas, because most of the time you just, care about the power and the setting and aren't doing anything super fancy. So often somebody will come to this class and expect to have it be more different because it's on induction, and it ends up being basically like cooking on any other type of stove, because induction is pretty easy to use once you get used to it. And then I want to talk briefly about our sponsor for these workshops, which is Peninsula Clean Energy. So again, Vanessa from Peninsula Clean Energy couldn't be here tonight, so I'm going to be describing Peninsula Clean Energy and their programs to you all. If you have questions about them, feel free to ask, but me and Irvin may not be able to answer them if they're too specific. So Peninsula Clean Energy is the clean energy provider in San Mateo County. They're a community choice aggregator that was created by the city council or created by the county in order to procure clean energy for their residents. They've since expanded to Los Banos, but they're a public organization, and they're basically responsible for procuring clean energy and for then giving that energy to be transported to you through PG&E. So if you're in their service territory or the service territory of any of the community choice aggregators, you might see two different entities on your electricity bill. You might be paying for delivery to PG&E, but you're actually paying Peninsula Clean Energy for generation. So they offer lower rates and a lot of great programs to their customers compared to PG&E. They have, lower rates than PG&E's base rates, but they also have, you can purchase sort of even more clean power from them for a slightly higher rate. So they are trying to make 100% of their electricity provision clean and carbon free. And right now, I think all of their electricity provision is carbon free, but they're trying to move off of large hydropower that isn't necessarily sustainable. And they have provided a lot of savings through their lower rates to San Mateo County customers, huge reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which is really exciting. And a lot of that savings is, or some of their savings and profit is getting reinvested in the community in electrification benefits. So they have some information and resources about Induction on their website. They have a great video where Chef is, going through making a crepe on Induction and kind of cooking while talking about the process and talking about the technology. So I recommend checking that out if you want to actually see a demo of this. And they also have a wide program of support for home electrification, a lot of rebates, and then they've started a new zero interest loan program. And they have especially high rebates for low income households in their service territory. So if you're doing any kinds of extensive electrification upgrades, they don't have a ton of Induction specific programming, but they do have these larger programs that can include Induction if you're doing upgrades for low interest loan or for some rebates. Okay. Yeah, and you can reach out to them and ask any questions that are for them at peninsulacleanenergy.com or Clean Energy, and they're all over the place. So looking one more time at the questions, we're running out of time. We're coming up on 7. Let's see. So, okay, I had a question come in about the Induction Loaner Program. We do have 2 programs. We have a larger one that's for people in Alameda County, but we do have a volunteer run one that's a bit slower in Palo Alto. So anyone who's curious about that, wherever you live, you qualify for it as long as you're willing to come to Palo Alto to pick up a cooktop. Do I know if Bayron still has funding available for the Induction cooktop rebate? I'm not totally sure. I think they do. It was still on their website the last I checked, but if there was some risk of them running out, I don't know anything about that specifically. Okay, last thing I'll say here is thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your time. We have a feedback form, which will get emailed to you and which Erwin will put in chat. It's extremely short. It's like 3 questions. It will take you probably 2 minutes max. We would love to get your feedback on these workshops and be able to keep presenting and keep making them better for you. We have a series of 4 workshops on different home electrification topics twice every year. So if you're curious about heat pump central heating or heat pump water heaters or home solar and batteries, you can learn more at our presentations next year. And huge thanks to Peninsula Clean Energy for supporting this, to Vanessa for putting together the Peninsula Clean Energy presentation, and also to Physicians for Social Responsibility for those resources for the slides earlier. Okay, I don't see any other questions that haven't been addressed unless I missed some. So I think we're done here. Thank you all again. And good luck on any induction or cooking journey that you have coming up.